My first passage is from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 8, verse 18 to 9:1. You, who are my comforter in sorrow, my heart is faint within me. Listen to the cry of my people from a land far away. Is the Lord not in Zion? Is her king no longer there? Why have they aroused my anger with their images, with their worthless foreign idols? The harvest is past. The summer has ended. We are not saved. Since my people are crushed, I am crushed. I mourn, and horror grips me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is there no healing for the wound of my people? Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. Well, when Andrew asked me to preach, I opened the lectionary, and here's what I found. And I have to say that this passage resonated for me. I read it and said, yeah, I understand. Because you see, Jeremiah is looking at an Israel that has been conquered. People have been taken into exile. And they have been asking, well, where was God? Why didn't God save us? And yet the answer is pretty much what my mom used to tell me when I was a kid, which is, it is your own fault. Do you ever hear that? Do you ever experience that? Where you're in trouble and you look around and say, man, I created this problem my very self. I created it. And you know, sometimes people will come to me and they will say, why does God allow the suffering in this world? Why are there so many homeless? Why are there so many people in such distress? Why does God allow it? And I think, well, why did you allow it? Why do I allow it? Why do we allow it? That's the question, and that is the question that is grieving Jeremiah. Because what he has seen is he has seen a people who have turned their back on their God. And the harvest has come. Summer has ended. And they're not saved. They are not saved. And I read that and went, oh boy, oh boy. I feel it. I feel it. But here's the thing. God had a plan. It was a bigger plan than the very moment they were in. You know, when those Jews went into exile, they got torn from the temple, they got torn from their homes, and they were scattered. And do you know what they took with them wherever they went? They took with them monotheism. They took their faith. And this idea that there is one God was taken to the world. And so that moment, we are not saved. That's not the end of the story. So the first thing I want to say is, yeah, there are times in every person's life where you look around and you are afraid. There was a little girl talking to Congress this past week. And she looked at a little tiny thing, and she looks at him and she goes, I don't want your words of hope. I want you to panic. I want you to panic, and I want you to do something. It was powerful. It was powerful. That's where Jeremiah is. He's like, there's no hope. We didn't get saved. Now what? Now what? And this is a problem that they have created. And it happens that our New Testament passage tells the story of a man who created his own problems. So we go now to Luke 16, verses 1 through 13. The parable of the shrewd manager. That's what they call it here. It's been called a lot of things, and whatever they call it, I still always look at this passage and go, what on earth was Jesus talking about? This is a great passage, and it's a little bit bewildering. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. What the manager was doing was he was embezzling, basically. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill, make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, you know what's interesting about this passage is you have all these little aphorisms tacked on to the end of a story that is simply outrageous. So you have this guy who is dishonest. He just cheats his master so as to create a place for himself. And the master commends him for dealing shrewdly. And then you have all these things tacked on at the end. And I almost get the feeling that when the people were putting the gospel together, okay, so Jesus told this story. He told this story about the unjust, the dishonest, the shrewd manager. people didn't really understand what Jesus was going for. But they knew that that wasn't a message they wanted Jesus to have in his mouth. So because you know how the Bible was written, it wasn't written right after he died. Somebody was not following Jesus around taking shorthand. So people collected his stories and then they put them together. And I think they got to this story and they went, oh. But everybody remembered that he said it. This is not the kind of story that someone would make up and put in Jesus' mouth. So they all knew that, yeah, he said those words, but I don't get it. So then they said things like, whoever can be trusted with little can be trusted with much, because they're trying to undo the message and somehow. There's this guy who's untrustworthy, and he's being commended. And they're like, well, we don't want everyone to go around saying what Jesus told us to be untrustworthy. So we better tack all this on. And yet I feel the same way. Every time I read this story, I try to think of an explanation for it. What on earth is happening here? Why? Why would Jesus have told a story like that? And so I have another story that's a little newer, although it's not that much newer because it comes from like the 5th century. So it is a different story, still a very old story, but it's interesting, and it will tell us about this. Adorned in gold and pearls, the beautiful actress Pelagia rides by a gathering of bishops. But the most blessed, Nonus, gazed after her very intently for a long space of time. And after she had gone by, he turned around and still gazed at her. Then he turned toward the bishops sitting round him and said, "Were you not delighted by such great beauty?" When they did not reply, he buried his face on his knees over the Holy Bible, which he held in his hand, and all his emotion came out in tears. Sighing deeply, he said again to the bishops, "Were you not delighted by her great beauty?" Still they did not answer. "So indeed," he said, "I was very greatly delighted, and her beauty pleased me very much. See, God will place her before his awful and tremendous judgment seat, and he will judge her on her gifts, just as he will judge us on our episcopal calling. What do you think, my beloved brothers? How many hours does this woman spend in her chamber, giving all her mind and attention to adorning herself for the play, in order to lack nothing in beauty and adornment of the body? She wants to please all those who see her, lest those who are her lovers today find her ugly and do not come back tomorrow." And here we are, who have an almighty Father in heaven offering us heavenly gifts and rewards. Why do we not adorn ourselves and wash the dirt from our unhappy souls? Why do we let ourselves lie so neglected? And so what is being expressed is this question of vision or focus. And I think that's a part of what Jesus is trying to convey to his disciples. You know, that unjust manager, he's not really telling his disciples you should go out and cheat people. But what he's saying is this guy knows what the game is. He knows he's in trouble and he does something about it. He has focus. And then he says, but what about people who are following God? Do we have that same focus in our lives? Do we also think every day, how can I do it better? How can I better follow this God I love? That's what is commendable about the manager. He understands the predicament he's in, and he does something. But here's the other side of this, is that this story is also a story of forgiveness. And here's the thing. The church is founded on forgiveness. But the truth is, we don't like it. It's hard, because the first thing about forgiveness, you got to understand that you need it. That's pretty hard right there. That's what the manager does. He knows he's in trouble. That's what Jeremiah does. He knows they're in trouble. Do we know that we need forgiveness? And then you have to understand that God's forgiveness just pours out. I mean, in many ways, this is a story of a manager forgiving a dishonest man. And it doesn't make sense. You know, some years back, when I was in Homedale, we had a ministers' association. And mostly, it was your conservative holiness pastors. You know, it was I don't know. It's your Nazarene, your Assembly of God, and those pastors. And I said, the thing about salvation is that we don't do it. God is the one who does the work of salvation. And it is simply a gift that we accept. And this man looks at me and he says, "You're absolutely right, Marianne. But you know, we also have to be good." Because what he could not hear is that our goodness doesn't buy us a ticket to heaven. Our goodness doesn't get God's attention. None of us are so good that God is going to be standing there going, "Hey, look at my servant Marianne. Isn't she great?" No, we're not. And so we have to just take that forgiveness. But see, the hard thing is, that means we have to look at the people we know don't deserve forgiveness and say, wow, maybe God has also forgiven them. And boy, I have a list of people right now that I don't think God should forgive. I won't list the people that I really just assume God throw into the outer darkness. But the thing is, God's love is so much more amazing than mine. It is so much better than mine. And ultimately, it is that love that is transformative. That amazing love. And so the people of Israel, they turned their back on God, and he sent them out into the world and used them to convert the world to monotheism. He had a plan. He's kept loving them from that day to this. And truthfully, they're still not good. Because neither are we. None of us. We're all in need of a God who forgives. And so I'm just going to quote a woman, Suzanne Guthrie, who's an Episcopal priest. And she says, "I love this ironically twisted story of the shrewd steward. If only I could engage the same cleverness and energy toward the kingdom of God that I apply to frivolous things, or adorn my soul with the care, expense, and attention to detail that an actress prepares to walk the red carpet on Oscar night. How skillful the con man compared with the naive children of light." Of course, this is another Lucan story of absolute forgiveness. Only God could appreciate the gifts of a consummate con man in such a way as the master does in this story. Although the implication is that we too must also forgive lavishly. Thanks be to God.